It's my pleasure to welcome Robert Pape, one of the leading scholars of military strategy and the political effects of force. Bob is a professor at the University of Chicago and the founding director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats. His work on coercion, terrorism, and air power has shaped debates about the limits of military force for decades, and he has advised U.S. administrations across multiple presidencies on national security issues. His book, Bombing to Win: Air Power and Coercion in War, challenged longstanding assumptions about the effectiveness of strategic bombing and sparked much debate about the limits of air power. More recently, he has been writing extensively about the unfolding war with Iran on his Substack, The Escalation Trap, where he argues that tactical successes like precision strikes or decapitation operations can create an illusion of control, while actually increasing the risk of wider escalation. So, Bob, to kick off our conversation with the 2026 emerging leaders, the cohort read about what you call the smart bomb trap, where early military successes can create pressure for deeper involvement. So, looking at the trajectory of the new Iran war so far, where do you see that dynamic playing out most clearly? And I think for me, where, if anywhere, might the evidence be pushing you to rethink or refine that argument?
Well, thank you very much, Ariel. And thank you all very much for having me. The emerging leaders, I have spoken at a number of these over the years, and it is really a remarkable program because, believe it or not, 5 or 10 years from now, you're going to not be emerging anymore. You're going to actually be in those leadership positions. And the people you have next to you on your cell phones, you're going to be talking to them quite a bit over time. So it is really quite an honor to come and speak with you. We're not often, I'm not often coming at the moment when we're at a true pivotal moment. We're at quite a pivotal moment now. And we're going to talk about this with the smart bomb trap. And we're going to talk about the details. And I don't know if you know, but it's just been announced in the Wall Street Journal that we're sending 2,500 Marines. And so things are moving here. That's my stage 3. So a quick answer here is we're actually on pace with the stages that I outlined. And it looks like we're heading right into the heart of it. But where I want to actually start, and then I'll get into, I'll try to keep this opening answer to about 7 or 8 minutes, and then we can go around. But I want to start with where we are today in the biggest of pictures. The biggest of pictures is Iran is stronger today than before the first bomb fell. So just to be absolutely crystal clear, Iran is not weakening. It is not about to collapse here. At least the odds are completely unlikely. So when I say not, I mean 90% unlikely. There is no mechanism here to say anything 100%. Even but just to be very, very clear, Iran is more powerful and more dangerous than it was before the first bomb fell. Why is it more dangerous? It's more dangerous because when we tried to do regime change, we were tactically successful with the bombs. The bombs hit the targets. They were always going to hit the targets. For 30 years, they always hit the targets. So there's no debate in air power about do the precision bombs hit the targets. People may not know that, but nobody thinks there's a debate about that. And on top of that, we killed the leader, the supreme leader, and we're up to at least 49 leaders last count. I think we stopped counting how many leaders because we are killing plenty and plenty of leaders. But what is happening is we are attacking not a brittle regime. I was on this podcast, The Diary of a CEO, and they had this prop. They had a Jenga game. And so they had me. They wanted me to talk about which of the pieces to pull out. And I said, "Well, I'm really glad you brought that prop because that's what smart people think the Iran regime looked like." And I don't mean dumb people. I mean really smart people. And I guarantee you, the people on the Diary of the CEO think they're smart. But the fact of the matter is that is not the way to conceptualize this regime. The way to conceptualize it is more of a matrix. It's more of a, it's not quite jello, but it is something that can absorb shock. It is, a way to think about it is with modern corporate organizations, you don't have brittle structures. You have structures that can adapt to change in real time. Well, that's what a revolutionary government is built to do. So this is not an invention of corporate America. This is an invention of Mao in World War I. So this goes back a long way, and even before him, of course. So this regime was never going to be brittle, very unlikely, and that's why air power alone has never toppled a regime in over 100 years. And that's what my book is really laying out. So it goes through all the cases and really shows how I taught for the U.S. Air Force, where I debated the actual John Warden, the leaders of the regime change with Air Power School. And when I say I debated them, they were in the other room for years. Okay, so this wasn't like, oh, we'd meet once a year. This was a daily occurrence. We debated in front of the Norwegian Air Force. I mean, all kinds of debate. So I'm very familiar with these arguments. But the bottom line is this is not a brittle house of cards. So when you pull that out, what you get is what's left morphs and it adapts. And what was left here was Republican guards. So what you got with this new leader is not just a son or so forth. You have the most representative of the most hawkish part of the Iran government. And when we killed the supreme leader, you may think, well, he was the worst of the worst. No, we've replaced him with the worst of the worst. He was the guy who, with his fatwas, was limiting Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Now, to the extent there was a limit, we killed it. That was the person we took out, and his fatwa died with him. So that has been taken out of the equation. And I'm not putting a lot of weight on that. I wouldn't bet a lot on that. So, but I'm just nonetheless explaining we really did attack a regime that was built to adapt. They published their Mosaic plan before the bombing. So they explained to us what was going to happen. And then they did it. And then they just morphed it with the most powerful part of the regime that was left, the most hawkish part. And that's why what you're seeing is a very hawkish development. So the second part, that's why they're more dangerous. The second reason, though, is they're more powerful. And I mean more powerful. So Iran today, after this horizontal escalation that I've talked about in foreign affairs, and you may know about this, that strategy, which we can discuss later, they now control the Strait of Hormuz. They control the Strait of Hormuz. We don't control the Strait of Hormuz. They control the Strait of Hormuz. They're putting out more oil than they did last week through the Strait of Hormuz today. I don't mean a long time ago. I mean now. They're just negotiating now with the Indian government to get stuff through. They didn't block it. They didn't mine it so nothing could pass through. What they've done is they control it so that they can control whose ships get to go through without getting attacked and whose ships are going to get attacked if they try to go through. And they have the precision drones, and if they need it, they have the Russian intel now to be able to make those discrete decisions here and actually control the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is really quite a stunning result. Not just because we didn't anticipate it, it's much, much bigger than that. So for 50 years, since the 1970s, America's number one goal in the Middle East is not Israel. So I'm sorry for all the Israel supporters. They want it to be Israel, and people that don't like Israel, they all want it to be about Israel. And no, it's been about oil. And what does that mean? That means specifically to prevent an oil hegemon from controlling the Strait of Hormuz, to be absolutely precise. That has been the number one objective. The week before the bombing started, I'm giving a presentation to our Army War College. We're talking about this exact set of events, and that is the number one discussion, one of the number one discussions. So right now, we have a catastrophic failure in terms of our security goals for the Middle East. This is catastrophic. This is unbelievable that we've gone this far. But it's the case that when I say Iran is powerful, it could actually get even more powerful. So I'm not as powerful as it is today. Here, number one, we don't have a strategy, a plan that we can be confident in and sure we can succeed in taking those straits back. We can talk about that, but the amount of casualties we're likely going to have to eat. So you've all seen Saving Private Ryan. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. If you're going to take the straits back with the Marines, you might take Carg Island, but if you're really going to do an amphibious assault here, these are incredibly bloody in history. We don't have any cheap amphibious assaults, which is why they don't happen very much. And in World War II, those movies, and Saving Private Ryan, what you were seeing were little German pillboxes, machine guns, doing most of the damage. And that's where 10,000 died. They died to those with those machine guns here. Well, you can just imagine that in spades. And then on top of that, the drones can be fired from hundreds of miles away. They don't have to be right here. They can be fired from the Sears Tower, the Willis Tower. They can be very far away. So I'm not sure we're going to actually do the amphibious. I'm just letting you know that. Now, what does that mean, though, that we don't have this great capability to go take it back? Well, right now, you're seeing that that's getting priced into the price of oil. So yes, we're putting the reserves on, but that's not how the oil prices are being priced. They're being priced according to risk. Because once you put those reserves out, use it and it's lost. You can only use those reserves one time. Everybody knows that in the business. So what you are seeing is that people now have shifted expectations, and they're in the middle of this middle stages here, where in the middle of the smart bomb trap, you go from precision air power, hit the target, strategic failure, to the long war. That's really what's occurring now, and the expectations of the long war. So we're moving in the Marines, likely, and I just know this from the Wall Street Journal, so that's as much as I know. And it will take them probably until April 1st to get there. So they're not getting there in 24 hours. So if you think the cavalry comes right away, it doesn't. So October 7th, the cavalry didn't come to save the 1,000 Israelis here for 48 hours, and that's how so many died. Well, it will take even longer to get the cavalry here with the Marines. So this is one of these issues. If you were going to do this, you should have planned for it in January. You see, it takes that long to get there. So it's probably 2 weeks before they will be able to get there. And they're coming from the Pacific around Japan, just to sort of let you know. And they've got to come on ships, because that's the point here. You got to bring all that stuff with you. It's not just get on a plane, get off, and suddenly you've got amphibious landing gear. You've got to bring it sea, and that's where the time comes in. So in that couple of week period of time here, I'm not saying that there'll be enough pressure here to really start to fracture the coalition, but that's what I'm going to be looking for quite a bit, the GCC. So I was on last night with Dubai, and they're getting more and more nervous. And it's not because they're nervous so much actually about the drones. You might think that they're scared about the drones, because I was asking the folks that were doing the podcast how they were sleeping and everything. That's not it. But the key thing you might not know is you're hearing all about the oil that goes through the Strait of Hormuz. 65% of the entire GDP of the UAE goes through the Strait of Hormuz. 65%. Saudi Arabia, very similar. So it's not, oil is, of course, the number one thing. But this is like when you shut down the Strait of Hormuz this way, you are crushing over time those economies. Now, they're pretty rich, right? So they've got a lot of, it'll take time to really get to, sort of the bottom of the barrel. But nonetheless, 65%, that's what's at stake for them right now. And that's why, number one, what you could see here in the next few weeks, what I'm looking for are the beginning of fracturing of the regime, of the coalition. The second thing is the Shia outside of Iran, because we have Shia in Iraq. We have 15% of Saudi Arabia is Shia. We have Shia 10% in the UAE. But it's the oil hegemon problem that we've been studying for decades. Just to be clear, starts with controlling the Strait of Hormuz, and then you unify the four puddles of oil that are in there. That's Iran's oil, that's Saudi Arabia's oil, that's Kuwait's oil, and that's Iraq's oil. And Iraq is now Shia, very much governed by Shia, and maybe they won't get along and maybe they'll disagree, or maybe by April, there could be some deals being cut. Because after all, Iraq doesn't want to have all of its GDP crushed either. You see? So there's quite a bit of leverage here that could grow into even more power over time. And that is right on track with the escalation trap stages. Final thing to say, and this is something that I've laid out in more detail on videos on the Substack, the escalation trap, than in public, but I've done it some in public, is the final set of issues here. Issue number one that we should talk about, because obviously I've spent years studying suicide terrorism, decades, so I know quite a bit about that. And why is that growing? And all let's maybe save that for Q&A, because that will be an obvious thing, because that's coming in. We are going to have a stage 3 and a stage 4. So stage 1 was we hardened the regime. Stage 2 is we've strengthened the regime. Stage 3 is we're having growth of terrorism over time. But there is a stage 4, which is we have triggered the dispersal of the uranium, the enriched uranium. So this actually didn't start on February 28th. This was the huge problem with Trump bombing Fordo, and it was a known problem. So for 20 years, since 2005, I have been modeling the bombing of Iran. And I've been doing that because we have been worrying about Natanz, then we added Fordo, and then we got B2s. So I've added all the, so I've been doing this for a long period of time. And when I say modeling it, what I mean is I teach at the University of Chicago, and I teach a class called Strategy, and I teach it in the spring. So the last day of my strategy class, which each of these are 90-minute lectures, we model for 90 minutes the bombing of Iran. And what you always saw in these 90 minutes was a series of stages. So the thing we would do is you would bomb Natanz and Fordo, you'd use precision attack, and you'd use what's called double tap attacks. So with Cy Hirsch in the New Yorker in 2004, I explained to him that he thought we'd have to use a tac nuke to take these things out. I said, no, we're going to do double tap attacks. And what do you mean? Nobody's talking about that in the Pentagon. I said, well, they will, because they'll figure it out. See, GPS is not just 2-dimensionals like on your phones and Google Maps. It's 3-dimensionals. That means you can set a bomb to blow up a hole in the ground, and then you can estimate the depth you're going to blow up, and you can time the next bomb to come in seconds later, lower, and drill your way to the bottom. That's what a double tap attack looks like. And that is what we plan to do. So we were going to be 90+ percent successful against Natanz. And then later with Fordo, we had to build the Moab, that 30,000-pound bomb. So we needed a bigger bomb because it's deeper under the ground. But we did that. And you're still at 90%. Israel cannot do this. Israel would be able to handle Natanz maybe, but could never be able to handle Fordo, which is why we were always going to have to bomb Fordo. The Americans, Israel just can't do it. But what happens after you bomb Fordo? You bomb Fordo and you destroy the facility, but you haven't destroyed the enriched uranium material. That is the gold. See, so taking out the facility here, now it's not like it doesn't matter at all, but in June, they had 1,000 pounds of 60% enriched uranium, 1,000 pounds. And they also had 10,000 pounds of 5 and 20% enriched uranium. And that's enough for between 10 and 16 bombs, depending on how good they are. 10 and 16 bombs. Not one bomb, not 2 bombs, not 100 bombs, exactly 10 to 16. And we know this from our IAEA inspectors, David Albright. We have lots and lots of detailed analysis of this, and we've had this for many years. This is not classified information. You may not know the information, but that doesn't mean this has not been available to all of the experts who really have been studying this. So what does that mean? You destroy the facility, but you don't have the material. And so what I always said was, well, they're not going to let the IAEA back to inspect. That's a political decision, so I made that call. And so what does that mean? That means as every month goes by, you have a wider radius of where that material could be dispersed. You have a dispersal problem. Think of it like Savannah Guthrie. We tried to find her. Each day, the radius got wider. Each day, the radius gets wider. And Iran is 2.5 times the size of Texas, just to put that in some perspective. On top of that, we have satellite imagery in the open. I put this on the Substack. Watching them pull stuff out of these places. Now, maybe they're taking out coffee makers, but what do you think they're taking out? And the material is stored in these, you've heard them, scuba-sized tanks. They're a little bigger than that. They're more like my size, but nonetheless, they're easily dispersed, put on trucks, flatbed trucks, and just moved anywhere. And you can then, from there's literally hundreds and hundreds of warehouses and tunnels and you don't need, because you're not reproducing the quantities anymore. You're just going to refashion what you have. You see what I mean? And so when Trump bombed Fordo, he didn't contain the problem. He dispersed the material. That was the trigger to disperse it. And that's why by the time we get into February, we have new satellite photography in February at Estefan. They're taking stuff out of that they had dug out. We're probably getting pretty nervous about that enriched uranium. So I don't know exactly what Senator Blumenthal, I know Senator Blumenthal, I don't know exactly what he saw in that classified briefing when he came out. I don't know if you saw this, but his ashen face when he comes out, I would not be surprised that if I have the civilian satellite photography at this level of fidelity, imagine what we have inside. You see, now if we knew where that material was, we would have already sent SEAL Team 6 in to go get it, even if all of them would be killed. That is how precious that material is. So this is then stage 4, which is the dispersal of the nuclear material. And this is a real problem now because it can be dispersed inside of Iran and it can be dispersed outside of Iran. This is how you would get probably not a nuclear bomb on Tel Aviv, but radiological attack on Tel Aviv. And there are 7 million Jews in Israel. As far as I can tell, there are fewer now in Israel than before October 7, because there are fewer people coming in and more going out. I think one radiological bomb in Tel Aviv, I wouldn't be surprised if hundreds of thousands left, if not more. And it could then be anywhere. And you've got, of course, all those networks that we talk about, the Hezbollah network, the Houthi network. And so when President Trump bombed Fordo, we can have all the victory narratives we want. This is the escalation reality, I call it. And he triggered the dispersal of that material. And we have no good way to find it. So that is where we're heading. So you asked me, and look, I really wish I could say that, this caught me by surprise and that caught me by surprise. But I laid all this out days before. I had a half-done book on the smart bomb trap, you see, and I keep getting all these other books. If you look at my work, I keep putting it on the side. But then I saw what was coming, and I thought it was going to be much worse than Venice for sure. And that's why I decided, for the first time ever, I'd never done a Substack, and it turns out you can actually teach an old dog new tricks. So you can do stuff like that, and it's not so hard, because they've made it so user-friendly, even for someone like me. But the fact of the matter is, those were the stages. And what I'm trying to do, Ariel, in that material is not just comment on, events. It's not like being on... I did CNN, I've done MSNBC, so I will do all that. But it's not about just being instant reaction. You see, I'm trying to lay out the frameworks I've been teaching. And I started to develop these frameworks when I taught for the U.S. Air Force in the 90s. And I have some of my students who were Air Force officers, served their time, retired as generals, some colonels, and they've been emailing me like, they've been saying, Bob, I bet you're smacking your head because you laid all this out for us in the 90s. And yes, the details have all changed. We have new technology, and everybody wants to say, well, we have a new technology. And doesn't that mean we can just forget about everything? And especially if you're 30 years old, you like to say that. It opens the corridors, you see. And I did that too. So I'm familiar with that. But what you end up with here is really a pretty, there is a series of stages of escalation we're going through. And there's not an easy out. So I'm sorry, I went on longer than I said I would, but I really wanted to give you the full picture.
This is great, and you gave us a lot to go off of. And so maybe I'll follow up with a question that we all sort of agreed, and then I'll pass it around to you all. But a question that we all were agreeing we'd like to hear your thoughts on. There's no single easy way out, but what are the de-escalation pathways to counter the escalation trap?
Yeah, so the first pathway that people have been asking me about for the last few days is, can't President Trump just pull the plug and get out? So if you think about this from American politics here, you've got all the Democrats didn't want this war, and they also think, most of them, that you should just stop this war. And I'm not trying to keep the war going. So let me just analyze that as a problem. So this is not like a Venezuela issue in many, many ways, but it's also worse than Ukraine. So when Putin went into Ukraine, he had a quick and decisive victory strategy. And then after about 2 weeks, everybody figured out it wasn't going to work here. And he decided to keep going, but he could have pulled out after those 2 weeks. And Ukraine wasn't going to go attack it back and take a big hunk of Russia. So there was a way to end the Ukraine war in the first 2 weeks if you were Vladimir Putin. He didn't do it. He should have. But here, this is a much different story. So in order to end this war in the way we would understand it here, it's not enough for the United States to say, we're going to stop. And what would that mean? It would mean pulling back all of the forces. So when we say America has got to stop, it's not like we just going to pause anymore, because Ron's seen this game many times. You're not going to fool them. We have paused. We said we'll negotiate with them, and we keep killing their negotiators. So this is you fool me once, shame on you. Well, we fooled them twice. I don't think we're fooling them again. And so you'd have to pull the forces all the way back. You see, it's not going to be enough to just say, oh, I changed my mind. But that's not enough, because you don't just have one actor now, you have Israel. So if you're really going to stop this, you've got to stop Israel from launching more raids whenever it wants. And Israel's great at saying it's not going to bomb and then killing, dropping the bombs 24 hours later. So the rhetoric isn't going to work anymore. And so you got to stop Israel. And that means you're going to have to do some stuff that's really constraining on Israel. So it's not going to be enough to get a promise from Netanyahu. That's not going to work. So you got to stop Israel. Then you got to stop Russia. See, Russia has an incentive to keep this war going. What's their incentive? They get a wider area of discretion in Ukraine. Ukraine right now, I'm sure, is shaking in their boots because we are so consumed right now. Ukraine's not even on making the list, and you probably don't even know, but Vladimir Putin has made some of his biggest, still small, but biggest territorial gains just in the last few days. It's not even making the page, not even the front page. It's not making anything in the pages here. You have to go to the Institute for the Study of War to even find out what's going on in Ukraine. So Vladimir Putin will want to keep this going, keep feeding that intelligence. And then lastly, you've got to get the Iran to stop. So the idea that, okay, we're just going to stop and Iran's going to give the Strait of Hormuz back. That the leader, now I didn't think there's any chance of this, very remote. I'd say maybe 10% chance, I guess. But the leader's statement that came out, I think it was yesterday, says direct. They're not giving it back. Why? Because they want to break the coalition. They want to move the GCC, and I've been writing about this. We can talk about the details of how they would do it, what the logic is, how likely it is. But they want to break that alliance because it's a counterbalancing coalition against them. They want to break it. You see what I mean? And so how are you going to get all four of those actors to stop the war? That's the problem here. And I said, I was on Chris Hayes. And see, he wants to hear because, and I'm not saying it's a wrong hope, okay? And I'm not saying I want the war to keep going. I really don't, okay? But these are the problems here with just simply saying we're just going to stop it because we can stop America, but what about these other three actors, right? Now, some people, just to keep going on this, have been really pushing hard on me when you got on these longer podcasts. So, okay, Professor Pape, you've said you've had four White Houses, you've given advice. So what would you give this White House advice if they would even, and I did advise the first Trump White House on Afghanistan. And I'm not expecting they would do it here. And I said, well, I think really the best hope you would have. So we had a deal the Friday before Trump, a possible deal the Friday before Trump started the bombing. That's the deal that Witkoff and company were negotiating. Jared Kushner and Witkoff were negotiating. And he decided it wasn't good enough. It was basically like Obama 2.0, the JCPOA 2.0. Maybe a little bit better, actually. But still, it was he just didn't think it was good enough. But that was a deal, that JCPOA. We should just understand it wasn't going to solve the problem of Iran nuclear weapons for 50 years, but it was solving the problem. And we now have the evidence here to look in the last 10 years. There is demonstrable evidence it was solving the problem. And it at least was freezing it for 10 or 15 years, which right now looks like a pretty good outcome, you see. Except to say you're going to go back to that deal. How are you going to go back and get Iran to give up all this power? How are you really going to get them to give up the power they've acquired? States don't give up power. Okay? Here's the things that you would at least have to put on the table. And right away, you're going to say, oh my God, that's never going to happen. I'm not saying these are going to happen, but you push me, I'm going to give you a low probability, but something that at least Iran might be willing to talk about. So number one, the American Congress would have to pass a law that if Israel bombs another leader in Iran, they will cut off the funding of all the funding to Israel through the end of Trump's presidency. Through the end of his presidency. And it would have to be a law through Congress. It's not good. Again, these paper promises anymore. They're going to need to see some wherewithal behind us. But that's not even going to be, I don't think, good enough. You would have to then, number two, pressure Israel to sign the non-proliferation treaty. So I don't know how many of you know this, but we keep talking about how Iran is not living up to the non-proliferation. Israel's not a member of the non-proliferation treaty. You see, so this has always been an asymmetry, and we've all papered over it and so forth. But what does that mean to be a member of the non-proliferation treaty? It means on-site inspections by non-Israelis. On-site inspections by non-Israelis, published by the IAEA. So the kind of reports that the IAEA has been publishing on Iran would now be published about Israel. You see, that now Iran, I think you'd at least maybe be able to get, I don't know if they would have a phone call with you because, again, they'd at least be able to have some intermediate, now you've got something to begin a conversation with. But if you're not willing to do those things, why are they giving this up? Because you've persuaded them. Their survival is on the hook for real, not 10 or 20 years from now, but by the end of the next month. You've persuaded them. You've trained them to understand their survival is immediately at issue. Why are they going to give up power that's only going to weaken them and make it easier for us to destroy them? What exactly is that logic going to look like? So I'm trying to give some, I think, the best cases we could get to, but it's a really, this is different than many other conflicts we've gone into. The public is only now starting to understand it's different. But the folks who have been, again, modeling this, doing this, and teaching about it for a long time, this is exactly why the whole idea was not to bomb Fordo. Once you bomb Fordo, that's the first stage of the smart bomb trap. Actually started last June. That's what really was the beginning of it. And as I always said in my class, a year later, you were going to come back for regime change. Why? Because that's the only option you got. It's not going to work, but you're forced by the pressure of events to try regime change. And it's literally on schedule. You see, they did it sooner than I thought, actually. And I'm afraid the next is the ground power dilemma. And that's where we're heading with the 82nd Airborne being called up, the Marines. We're heading to a ground power dilemma. Anyway, so again, I'm sorry I go on for maybe a little bit too long on your questions, but there's really quite a challenge in front of us.
I don't know. I have follow-ups, but I want you all to ask your questions. And Matt and Abby are off to the races, so we'll go in that order. If you could maybe pass that mic over to Matt, that would be great, and just push the little green.
Hi, my name is Matt. Before coming back to Chicago last year, I was a special advisor for innovation in the Pentagon. So I was working on emerging technologies there with Defense Innovation Unit, Strategic Capital, Cat Hicks Replicator Initiative. Out here, I'm an adjunct lecturer at UChicago. And then I do some consulting for some of the technology firms out here. So my question goes to, what are the larger geopolitical implications of this? You touched on this a little bit when you mentioned Russia and the Ukraine, but as the United States is potentially forced to sink more and more resources into this problem, there's a lot of other actors outside of Russia watching this, right? There's the China and Taiwan issue. There's a lot of other actors that are waiting to see what happens here. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that.
So it just so happened in June when we were bombing Fordo, I was beginning a 2-week visit in China to tour their advanced industries. I'd made many trips to China. Most people, when they go to China, they go to Beijing, Shanghai. I went to BYD. I went to Alibaba. I went to their laser robotics in Wuhan. I wanted to see the shop floor. And I was lucky because I've had enough opportunities to do it. And it was really quite an experience, and I'm glad to talk about that issue substantively in a second. But I was also there to talking with senior faculty at Peking University, who of course are consulting with the senior. I mean, there's not a lot of there's not even a paper wall between them here. And also then senior executives in BYD and Alibaba and so forth. Because I was there for 11 days. So we'd have dinners and they're always trying to get you drunk and everything and so forth. And I'm too old now, I can, but they would, I don't let them get drunk. And then you talk to them and get a lot of interesting talk. So the bottom line here is that I think we're making China number one. We're making China number one. If we designed a policy to make China number one, I don't think we could design it better. It's all coming together in the right pieces. Now, why do I say that? Issue one is, for years, China has been preparing for issues with the United States because when Trump came into office the first time, he slapped tariffs on China. So their whole plan, their digital China plan, everything they're laying out for me, it really starts around 2015. And it has very little to do with America, very little to do with Asia. With Europe. It's all Asia-centered. Their growth plans is not to come in. They might want to, steal secrets from America, but they're not trying to grow it like with the American market, which is why there's no BYD awesome cars here, which are really awesome, well beyond Teslas. But they have a plan, and that's Asia, because there are 2.5 billion people they can develop with in Asia. And sure, they'd be glad to sell us a few things on the edges, but the bottom line is that's why the tariffs had no effect on them whatsoever. They just no effect here, and they were in the driver's seat because it was not wrecking their long-term plan. So issue number one. Issue number two, when I talked to them about the bombing of Fordo, basically, their issue was when your enemy, your opponent, they wouldn't call it enemy in front of you, but when your rival is shooting themselves in the foot, don't get in their way. So let them get deeper into another quagmire in the Middle East. Don't stick your nose in it, because that's just going to help them bail themselves out. So they're perfectly happy to let us get deeper in, and this idea that they're going to somehow, like, again, we keep wanting to expect our enemies to be spasmodic and be irrational, and that's not what's been happening, folks. We're going up against folks who are coming at the soft. They're developing approaches here, which are long war approaches or long time horizon approaches, which is the American weakness. So that's how we're being beat. We're being beat by Iran. Vietnam beat us with a long war strategy. Iran has developed a long war strategy. China, it's not a long war, but a long horizon strategy that does not turn on them conquering anybody. Now, maybe Taiwan, none of the business folks want to get involved with anything to do with a conflict, because that would disrupt all their plans to make money. So they have a whole development idea, and they're the last thing we're telling me they want to do is get this diverted by having this war for them, which would be a problem. But anyway, so when I think about the global consequences, now that was June. This is worse. Why is it worse? It's worse because the country that is going to have the hardest time dealing with the economic shocks are going to be the richest democracies, not just rich countries so the rich democracies are going to have the hardest time dealing with this. And we are now going through a shock. And I'm just explaining militarily, we don't have good plans to seize the Strait of Hormuz. So I'm really not expecting, I'm expecting that by May 1st, Iran's still going to control the Strait of Hormuz. 2/3 likely they'll have it still by September. At least 50-50 they'll have it by the end of the year. So what are we really going to do to change this trajectory? You see what I mean? I'm not saying you can't do anything. And as you go further out, risk gets wider and more uncertain. But that's going to then mean by, let's see what, this is the 13th here, where gas is already at $370 an average. So, and that's only been 12 days. So now people are starting to price in the real risk of the long war. So I'm expecting by April 1st, for sure, we'll get $4. And that means you're going to have dominoes here. You're going to have grocery prices going up. You're going to have all kinds of prices going up, and you can't stop it. I mean, what are you going to do to stop it here? Now, if this were to go on through the summer, now you're in territory of the 73 oil shock. It was 151 days that OPEC took the oil off the market. 151 days. I've looked it up, 151 days. We're only at day 13. So we're not close to 151 yet, but that's a good benchmark. And when the oil was off the market for 151 days and then it came back on, it took 10 years to recover. We had what was called stagflation. That shock triggered the high unemployment, the high inflation, mortgage rates at 15%. That's what the 1970s were like. Ford couldn't fix it. Jimmy Carter couldn't fix it. The first 2 years of Reagan couldn't fix it. Okay. And it only started to turn around after the midterms in 82 here. And it wasn't the midterms. It took that long to wring that out of the system. Now, I don't know that it's going to go on for that long, but if it does, my goodness, China's you're just going to see, we're going to have more and more economic problems. We've got 40 trillion in debt already. Those interest rates on those bonds, if they go from 5% where they are about now to 7%, University of Chicago, they're shaking in their boots. Everybody's going to be shaking in their boots. City of Chicago, they're not going to be able to handle carrying those interest rates. So this is what we're looking at. China, they'll be hurt, but this is going to be like COVID. China built all the BYD stuff, all this stuff you're hearing. They did that under COVID.
Can I intercede before passing it to Abby? Which is just, we haven't elided the Maduro capture and the Venezuela takeover, like the U.S. takeover of Venezuelan oil. How does that and/or any like rescinding of limitations around Russian oil change the game for the U.S. as opposed to the 73 crisis?
Yeah. So let me say a word about the Maduro thing, which is, so when Trump announced that we had snatched Maduro, he also announced that we were going to take over Venezuela's oil and we were going to dramatically increase the production of Venezuelan oil. And then we were going to use the proceeds the way we saw fit. Well, what actually happened, and this is what I was saying about on X, but just right at that time, was there's no way we're going to follow through with this. And the reason is because the civilian, in order to extract that oil, you need civilians to do it. That's not a military mission. And those, and Venezuela is prime for resistance. So if you put in those civilian contractors in there, it's going to be worse than Blackwater in Iraq. They're just going to get killed. And they're not even going to take the risk because of all the history of what's gone on here. So this isn't going to happen. And then 10 days later, the oil execs in front of Trump in the Oval Office on television said that to him to his face. So what happened is Trump just gave up. So there's been no actual like new regime here. This is why is the current regime perfectly fine? Because it's getting everything they want. They're just as corrupt as before. They're doing everything they did before, and we're not putting any pressure on them to change any of that. So I think that in Trump's mind, he thought, well, that's probably the worst case. I thought with Iran, I went in with Venezuela. I thought I was going to get all this oil and make all this money and put it in the American budget and everything, but it didn't happen. And then I just backed off because I just gave up. You see what I mean? The real difference here is the history with Iran since 1953. You see, we toppled the regime in Iran in 53. That was a democratically elected regime, okay, in 53, Mossadegh. And we put in a dictatorship with the Shah. And that Shah dictatorship had the Savak, which is the secret police, which make Stalin's secret police look like nice guys. Okay, so this was not, the Shah was not Thomas Jefferson or anything like that. So this is the real difference between those two cases, you see, and that's why and it may have kind of mesmerized Trump a bit into how we got in this. Now, in terms of the oil moving around, the big issue here is going back to, again, the control in the Straits of Hormuz. If this goes on, I think what you're going to see is you will see some pretty extreme steps start to be taken by, say, the fall. So once you get to $6 gas, $7 gas, that's what the fall could look like. That's the territory of the 1970s with gas lines and so forth. Once you're there, we are pumping out more oil here. We have a lot. We'll just start passing laws that'll say that we'll not export any oil to anybody else. So Europe, you're on your own. That gives Russia enormous leverage over Europe. You see what I mean? So the second thing that we might start to do is start to actually do more drilling. That will take about 12 months. 18 months. So if we start drilling, especially offshore drilling, whoa, that means we're planning for this to be a 2 or 3 year problem, you see, because those oil companies, they're not going to drill into that expensive stuff unless there's an actual confident market for it. So that means that oil will be at $150 a barrel, and not just for a short term. So if you see drilling, that's a time to be nervous. Anyway.
On that very chipper note, Abby.
Yeah.
I know this all feels like very catastrophic.
Well, it's bringing all my areas of air power, economic sanctions, terrorism, the modeling of Iran. It's all come together.
My name's Abby. I run a foundation and we do peace building and diplomacy work in the Middle East.
Oh, great.
And we have a program that's doing a lot of countering censorship in Iran, and some human rights advocacy work.
Yep.
So this is all very relevant.
Good mission.
But you talked about sort of stage one being the bombing last year, and then stage two, we had to go for a regime change. And I guess I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what sort of regime change are we looking for, because we have actually had some sort of regime change. So when do we stop?
So what we imagine when we use the word regime change is what I call positive regime change. It's a new set of leaders that will move closer to America's demands, goals, aspirations. The way this is often thought about inside of governments is hawks and dove balance inside of a government, a regime. And so you often, whether it was the Milosevic, it's really the same across many regimes. It's a similar model, a hawk and dove model. And the basic idea is if you can kill the hawks, you've got a certain set of numbers of people in a regime at any point in time, snapshot in time. And let's say it's 100. And let's say it's 60-40 hawk dove. So if you can kill 30 of the hawks, now it's 40-30 dove hawk. You see, that's, I think, the way they thought about this. And that's how my Air Force officers, so when I taught for the U.S. Air Force, I was teaching mid-level officers, and I was teaching in a school that was specifically air strategy. This was not about undergrads, and it wasn't how teaching them how to fill out accounting or something. This was really the core of this. Many of my students would come in here, they're 35 years old. When I say students, they're your age, okay? They're 35 years old, they're 4 years below the zone, they had just bombed Baghdad. These are the best in the world at putting bombs on targets. They weren't coming to me about putting bomb on a target. They were coming to me to understand, well, if you hit the targets, what's going to happen? So that's been my forte for all these decades. And they would, and so I knew exactly where they started with. That's why I said, where's the starting point for the smart person? It's that Jenga game analogy. So what they come in with is thinking, well, it's hawks and doves, and they've got, we all have classified clearances up to SITK, which is way beyond top secret. So we go to the SCIF. So we have all, it's not about the information. You see, we're way beyond that. It's about the actual logic of what you're doing. And so what I would show them is actual analysis of different cases over time of exactly this issue of trying to change the balance of hawks and doves, where it just doesn't work out that way. You think it might, but the reason is once the bombs hit, it changes the politics of the doves. You see. So one way I try to explain this to Americans or to people is so right now there's a gap between the Trump administration and American society where the Trump administration has about 40% approval. So that means there's a gap. And we know that Iran's been trying to assassinate President Trump. So if Iran were to assassinate President Trump, does that mean that Democrats would take to the streets and celebrate in Times Square and say, hey, Iran, come on over for the party. We're going to celebrate how we joined hands and changed America's regime? That's not going to happen, you see. That's what we're expecting of the doves. We're expecting that there is a difference between hawks and doves. I'm not debating that at all. The intel that's showing that is real. It's not false. The problem is that they're not assessing, because it's not an intel problem. It's not a fact problem. It's a social science problem. What happens when you bomb? How does that change politics? That's not an intel officer. That's not a pilot. That is why they hired me. And so that's what they thought. I'm pretty sure, because I'm seeing the edges of it on the outside. And it's going through the natural learning. And that's why you're starting to hear that out of the White House, well, maybe the regime's not going to change. And Netanyahu, maybe it's not going to change. Well, they're starting to update a bit, maybe that model. And that's why I think they thought they were going to do something. And it just has never worked in 100 years. So it's again, we thought maybe we just need better intel or better widgets or better precision, and we've had all that. What we haven't found is the magic to solve the politics problem, where you lose not all the doves, you lose a lot of doves.
All right, Veronica, can you pick?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm Veronica Glick. I'm in the Cyber and National Security Practice at Mayor Brown, former State Department Cyber Bureau. So I have a cyber-related question.
Yeah, so you got you're on the so you don't know what's coming.
But no, it's interesting. So it looks like there's a possible Iran-based attack on a U.S. medical manufacturer that was been in the news recently. And when I think about some of the early operational cyber-related attacks, or we think about Stuxnet, which was potentially delayed some of the early cyber Iranian enrichment. So I'm curious if you think is this something that has changed strategy, or is it just basically another tool in the toolkit?
Yeah, so we first started to think about attacking an enemy as a system in the 1930s. So in the 1930s, we got some precision air power. We called it that with a certain bomb site called the Norden bomb site. And what that did is it encouraged people to think about, how would you take down the German economy? How would you do that? And so what they did is they developed these models with businessmen. So they got all the businessmen. So it wasn't just on their own. And they modeled the German economy, and they developed the idea called the industrial web, where all the nodes in the economy, and you know how we have network analysis now, and you can see all the nodes. So they did that here, and they had all the nodes, and that's where they developed, well, if we took out this one node here, it would crumble like a house of cards, right? So far, sound like cyber right now? Okay, so fast forward here to the 90s. In the 1990s, we got precision air power, and then that developed the idea of parallel attack. And what did that mean? Multiple nodes you could hit at the same time. Multiple nodes you could hit at the same time. And that produced a bit more system shock. The first idea in World War II did not work. We did it, it didn't work. Okay, this got a little bit better. And then when I was in the 90s, we had what was called information warfare. See, the word cyber, and some of my former students from SAS stood up Cyber Command. Okay, so I've been around. I've been around a long time. They've come to get PhDs under me, so I've got a lot of these relationships here. And so what's happening is the key to understand this is that there's a new tool, a new tactic going at the computer systems, essentially, and trying to cause cascading effects and different, there's the tactics will be different with the different ways to get into the computer systems and so forth. And that's normally the level at which corporations are trying to protect themselves. They're trying to make it hard for the bad guys to get into them, and then the bad guys are trying to find ways around that, right? So you're probably doing it. But the model of this is a higher level model, which is, can you attack multiple nodes at the same time and bring it down? And so far, what we have seen with cyber is it's a bad day, and because it doesn't actually destroy anything, not very much, even Stuxnet, the Stuxnet attack, that was like a bad couple weeks for the Iranian enrichment program. They just repaired the centrifuges. That there was about 600. I don't know if you probably know some of the details of this. So there were about 600 of them that crashed there, but they had like 15,000 of them, you see. So there's just a lot more give in the system. Now, it's very expensive to do that. So on a daily basis in peacetime, when you're not attacked, you're not going to, it seems very brittle, but over a period of 3 weeks, so to shut down a hospital for 3 weeks or 4 weeks where they can't do dialysis, they can't do heart surgery, is that really going to happen? Because we can go back to the age before computers and we can do quite a bit to save people's lives. Now, it's not as good, right? But so what I see here is that we do need to have defenses against the latest technology. Absolutely, for sure. But what you're seeing right now with Iran is they're doing that concept of parallel attack with drones hitting things. Now, maybe they'll add cyber on top of it, but the analysis I'm getting this weekend, I don't even know what day today is, Friday. The analysis I'm going to get this weekend from my folks, I'm asking them to do it, is about desalination plants. Because you got 100 million people in the Persian Gulf who there's no drinking water, right? And there's 450 plants. There's not a million plants. There's not 7 plants. There's 450 plants. And so now maybe you could attack those with computer viruses and computer cyber attack as well here. But I'm not really seeing yet. Now, if it's the case that Iran got into our air traffic control system, then it's like Die Hard 2. So I don't know if you've seen the movie Die Hard 2, okay? But the bad guy gets into the computer system and he resets the altitude and planes hit the ground and bad things happen to the passengers. So I'm not, but that would be a stunning thing to me, because I think we go to pretty great lengths to isolate those systems from the bad guys getting in. But if there is something to worry about, I would, even though I think it's a low risk possibility, I'd look at what are the things that within 2 days, if they go down, you would have thousands die. Not just it's expensive and you got to send them home like a government shutdown, or we're going to have, now air conditioning is a problem in the summer and you would have many people die, but I'm talking about more intense than that, you see. So I don't know if that really helps you, but it is, I think, the thing to think about. What systems, which if they really were disrupted and you put your thinking cap on and your goal was to kill people, that's your goal, not disrupt, what would they be here? I think that's really the issue. And it may be that for the city of Chicago, we don't have many of those things. You see, it may be that that's not there, in which case we're talking about the delay. We're talking about how do you repair, you see. So I've been also one thing. So I studied for a long time how you destroy and attack electric power systems, electric power grids. So this is, you get into the details of attacking systems. And until you actually destroy the generator halls, actually physically destroy them, it's just a bad day, a bad week, it's a brownout, and it does cause problems. But you got to destroy the generator halls. Once you destroy the generator halls, that's out for 4 to 6 months, and they're specially made. So you can't go just buy another one on Amazon. Those are the things I'd be looking for. What are the actual long poles for something serious? Because we're just killed, about 2,000 people in Iran, 200 girls, we burned them to death. They're looking for payback. They're not, that hasn't even begun yet. Yeah.
Vikash.
Hi, my name is Vikash. I'm a lawyer with the Illinois Attorney General's office now, but for many years I was a federal prosecutor focusing on national security matters, mix of counterterrorism, counterespionage, and cybercrime. I was curious, you mentioned that if this sort of continues, likely it's the rich democracies that are going to be the most challenged by this.
That's what I see. Yep.
And so I'm sort of curious what you think the response of those rich democracies is going to be. Europe, Australia, Canada. Are they going to try to exert leverage on the Trump administration to come to the table with Iran? Are they going to try to be all in and help retake the strait? Like, how do they respond? Because I assume they're gaming this out too and recognize that they're going to be.
I think that's great. So over the last 5 years, believe it or not, there's been a whole nother thing I've been doing for the last 5 years, which is studying political violence in the United States. So I have surveyed the public, done 20 national surveys of the public. Every 3 months we do this at our center. I have a big book coming out in September on this. I literally have the copy edits in front of me right now, and I don't know how I'm finishing these copy edits. But it's all about you call it polarization. It's way beyond polarization. I call it violent populism. It's another level beyond where it was 10 years ago. And I map all that out and what's going on. So we're having a conflict now, and costs come in. This isn't like 9/11. It's not just because it's not international terrorism. We were far more, we weren't unified. We always had, red and blue, disagreeing with each other, right? So that's not, but we didn't have violent populism. We didn't have all the waves of assassination attempts here that are happening on the right and the left, by the way. So it's not like just one side. We didn't have the violence during the George Floyd protests. There's still, I think, buildings shut down here in Chicago from that. And we didn't have January 6th here after, around 9/11. We didn't have the October 7, all the stuff that happened on this college campuses against Jews and against Muslims, by the way. It wasn't only Jews. Jews got it the most, but I studied this problem. So you're coming into not just a political division of Democrat, Republican, you're coming into a country where violence has been normalized for about 30% of the public, not 100%, and I map it out with my surveys, and it's probably not happened like that since the 1960s. So notice the Vietnam War did not bring us all together. Okay, that didn't, so we're used to thinking that when you have an outside problem like war, this might bring you together, rally around the flag effect, stuff like that. That happened on 9/11, okay? But during the 1960s, that didn't happen. Why not? I think my argument would be it's violent populism. We were so divided here, that was driving more wedges. So I think that what's going to happen as this goes on is we're going to have a wicked blame game problem. Wicked blame game problem. That right now, 40%, 41% of the public does not like this war. And they're looking for the off-ramps here. And I'm explaining, it's not that I don't want them to be there. Please don't I am not saying, please keep the war. I'm just saying this is going to be really hard. Well, that 41% here is going to start to get, the 59% is going to start to get pretty angry when these costs are coming up. This isn't something they signed up to here. They're not happy, and they weren't happy before. And so I think there's a chance you'll become even more divided, and you may end up, the midterms here could be the most dangerous midterms ever. So we're heading to some really, really difficult times. So remember the Charlie Kirk assassination and everything that happened there. So we just had Chicago Midway Blitz. Then we had Minneapolis, where we almost had a toe-to-toe battle with the National Guard and ICE. Think about that, how close we came. Those two that we haven't seen in over, since Civil War. Think about that. This is not like normal time. So that's why I'm trying to explain. We're really, this is not a good time never a good time to have this problem with Iran. We're now going to intersect the international issue with the domestic issue, and the midterms are coming. And what is President Trump going to do if the prospects of winning those midterms go down to what, losing both the House, the Senate, maybe even getting 60% Democrats in the Senate? I mean, how far could this go? You see what I mean? And then is he really just going to do nothing here? He's already talking about taking the ballot boxes and he's going to do the counting. Is that really? Is he not? I think we need to understand those problems didn't go away. Okay. And I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what he's going to do, but these are that issue when you talk about American politics here. So I think, unfortunately, there's a reasonable chance American politics is not going to be healthier because of this.
I just would love to, I feel like we maybe didn't get to a big part of Vikash's questions. I was hoping that I could nudge you on that one before we pass the baton to Michelle and then Chime and Paulina, which was really about how are other rich democracies, like gaming out this situation? How are they trying to intervene in order to avoid the playing out of the escalation trap that the Iran-Israel-U.S. war will bring to them?
Yeah, except for President Macron talking about sending the French aircraft carrier in, which I don't know what really that's going to do. It's like we don't have enough military power hitting tactical targets. What would that? So so maybe we're going to see sort of NATO come to the rescue, and we're going to have this giant 36 country invasion of Iran or something. I just don't think that's in the offing. I think that what we're probably going to see is that because of this was a war of choice, to be very clear. So this isn't a case like, say, Pearl Harbor, where we were attacked. This is a case where Donald Trump made a decision, and we don't know all the reasons he made the decision, but he certainly didn't give a big public address about it. And and what's happening is it's clearly a war of choice, you see. Now, under those circumstances, I think that it's going to be extremely difficult to not just build a bigger coalition, keep the current coalition together. Because what confidence do they have that Trump's leading them in a place that's anything other than over a bigger cliff? Where does that come from, you see? So it's not that they're not worried. It's not that they're not afraid. It's not they're looking for help. But the normal politics of how you bring everybody together, and the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. That was FDR's famous phrase after Pearl Harbor. Okay, well, Trump could say that, but I think most people are going to say, no, we have to worry about your decision next week. That's what we're worried about. And so and I say that having advised Republicans and Democrats. So I'm not a card carrying anything really. And so what I think you're really what you're really seeing is that I don't think the politics of coming together is going to be very easy. I think it's more going to go the other way around. And they're going to have their big economic costs. The governments are going to worry about falling and changing and so forth. Now, Ukraine is going to be much more vulnerable. So they're going to have that big problem. And whereas, before they were trying to keep inching America to support. Well, if America does get stuck down this, I think, that's gone, right? So you can see right away, Europe's going to have all these problems. They have internal problems. So I'm seeing that precisely because they're democracies, which I love, by the way. I don't want to go away from that either. So again, I want to be very clear. I'm fighting to keep the democracy. I think that it's just going to be extremely difficult. Authoritarian countries, UAE is authoritarian. I mean, we need to understand Saudi Arabia is authoritarian. China is authoritarian. These are countries, they're not going to want to kill their people, but these are countries that will be able to, so UAE, of course, wants Dubai. They want to be the playground for the rich and famous. Anyways, but they're still authoritarian. Democracies, I think, are going to have the biggest challenge. So I hope that's a better answer to and I'm sorry I didn't quite get that point.
Well, you touched on things that we had hoped to venture into, which is I wrote myself a long note about the implications at home in a few different spaces. And so you did touch on some of those. I'm
going to write more about the implications at home. So this escalation trap is not just about Iran. Yeah. You see, it's going to be something I'll probably be developing over the next several years as I'll be publishing, and then I'll have another intellectual home. And that intellectual home may well be on Substack here. I'm just finding out now how valuable that can be to lay out so much. I hadn't done that before.
Amazing. All right. Let's go with Michelle, and then we'll come over to Chime and Paulina. And we want to get in all three, so maybe if we could strive for more succinct.
I will do that, yes.
We can listen to you for hours, but I understand.
You can see I'm definitely a professor.
In high demand. Yes,
I'm never going to be that MSNBC crisp.
Yeah. You're excellent. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yes. Hi, my name is Michelle. I'm a program officer at a local foundation, Crown Family Philanthropies, and I oversee global health and emergency giving. Thank you for everything you shared. I'm really curious around this social science, political shifts that you mentioned earlier, especially thinking about the environmental, when you think of the 60% enriched uranium and other nuclear materials. I'm just curious, how does that fit into some of the strategic plans as people move forward?
Whose plans? When you say strategic plans, whose plans?
I guess the U.S.
You mean as material is dispersed?
Yeah.
Well, I think right now we're in a discovery phase as a country. So although what I'm laying out for you is something that I've talked about and taught and so forth, that's been in a very small circle, of course. Now, some of it's been an elite circle, but it hasn't been very wide. And so I think what you're really seeing right now, Michelle, is a discovery phase by the really smart elites. And that's why I think you're seeing this with CEOs. So did they know Iran was developing a nuclear program? Yes, but they've got so much going on and they're developing stuff in depth for their businesses. This is being shrunk to tiny amounts, very thin. That's how you can get the the idea, it's a house of cards, because the briefings, it's not just you're getting bad briefings, it's everybody's being told, give it to me in 12 seconds. So that means you're reducing what is really a 3-dimensional thing to 2 dimensions right off the bat. So I think what you're seeing is you're seeing, now what that means is you're going to go through a change of what I call expectations, where everybody's expectations are going to change at the same time. And that's what's happening right now in the discovery phase. And it's like inflation. So when inflation starts to go up, it's a problem. But when it goes up for 3 months, 4 months here, why does it linger? Why does it keep getting worse? It gets worse because the original reason for the inflation went away, but the expectations reinforced. People started to expect a bigger pay raise here. And all those expectations were happening across everybody at the same time. That makes the inflation worse. So the economists will tell you the inflation goes through stages. Stage 1 is the original shock. Stage 2 is when expectations congeal around that, and that's the worst stage. That's where we are right now. That's why I think things are going to get worse, because actors are going to start to prepare for their own benefit. They may talk verbally about helping others, but I'm not expecting Europe is going to be thinking much about bailing Donald Trump out. They're going to be thinking about bailing themselves out, you see, but it's with these expectations, this is going to go on for a while. So that's, I think, the real shift that's happening. It's like inflation.
Thank you. From one global health professional to another.
Yeah.
So, my name is Chime Sonye. I work in global health, but I started my career
You work in what's
global health.
Oh, global
I
health.
run the largest mental health network in Nigeria.
Oh my gosh.
And I started my career focusing on the UN Development Goals and also on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I have 2 questions. The first one is that there's been a lot of conversation about why now for the Trump administration. And I've heard Trump officials describe a unique moment of opportunity. And based on your work in the area, I'd be curious, what is the most charitable version of that? Why now for this war? As you described as a war of choice. And let me just get my second one out so you hear it.
Sure.
We talked about GCC, and we should have talked about it a lot more. Huge part of the conversation, it's been described in Western media as a big mistake from Iran to regionalize this war and have a global attack on the economy. And you see data centers hit, water infrastructure and things like that. How should we think about the GCC now? Yeah. Is the GCC, is Iran winning by regionalizing the war? Is the U.S. correct in its assessment that the GCC is pulling away from Iran? How should we be thinking about the GCC in relation to this conflict?
Those are great questions here. So I think that it's important to understand the origins of this attack, the February 28 attack, as an extension of the June attack on Fordo. And that's what I was trying to explain, that we attacked in June in Fordo. We knew we would destroy the targets that we destroyed, but we didn't get the fissile material. Now, once that happens, then what would you do? Well, what Trump tried was to go back to negotiation. So notice, even though he said the nuclear program was completely destroyed, what did he do within a week or 2 of the attack is he went back to negotiating with Iran. Why would you do that if you had actually taken the problem off the table, right? Because you didn't take the problem off the table. So he's got his PR, his victory narrative, but it's meeting that escalation reality. Now, that then goes on, and notice that the Iranians are not as forthcoming as they were before, you see. So he's not happy because he's not getting the bigger, better deal. He's getting worse deals, and that, of course, isn't what he was in for. And now, as time goes on, he's had, I think 9 meetings with Netanyahu since he took office here. 9 meetings with Netanyahu. That's quite a few. And I don't know what they're talking about. I'm not in those rooms, but dollars to donuts, what they're talking about is the intel on what's happening, in part, on what's happening with that dispersed material. So Israel's got famous for humans, all right? So they're going to, and now this human here, it's like Swiss cheese. What you have, if you have a glass with human, you have the actual glass, but what I don't know is everything I don't have with the human, you see. So it's like Swiss cheese. It's solid here and holes everywhere else. So that's probably what's been going on over this period of time. And they've had the economic sanctions. Wouldn't be at all surprised that Trump's cooked up with the CIA to foment the pro-democracy movement. I think we're going to find that probably happened here, and that's been going on, I think, because what do you do if you disperse the material? You've got this problem. You see what I mean? And then as we get into February, so Trump does tell the pro-democracy group to challenge the regime, and then he does nothing while 30,000 are slaughtered. Nothing. So just think about that for a moment. That's what happened on the middle of January. Okay, 3 days in January, somewhere between 3,000 and 30,000 dead. And Donald Trump told them to do that. Okay, so that's how we got there. Now, but still, we have our ship. So what I do is I track a lot. I pay attention to where we're building up. When did we first start to build up here? Around the second week, end of the first week of February. Okay, so you might say, well, okay, we move ships around a lot. And that's true. But that's when I got my attention on this, was literally somewhere around February 7th, because I saw we're doing some inordinate building up around here, and then it's getting worse and building up even more. And I put this X post out that got 8 million views. I've never had that before. I mean, oh my God, because I'm explaining that we've got more built up here than it's close to the 2003 Iraq War, which is where all that came from. I was explaining that this is really quite a lot of stuff that we're building together. Why then? Well, what I discovered later, not at the time, was that we now have satellite photography, and it was published in the New York Times earlier this week, of Escalation, which is one of those nuclear sites. And in the New York Times, you can see they have the February 2nd view, and they have the view 2 weeks later. And what you see is the Iranians are digging out stuff from Escalation. Remember I mentioned they're digging out stuff from Fordo? Well, now they're digging out stuff here. So I think that may have been the trigger. That may have been the now then what does Netanyahu do? If I'm right that a lot of this is about the nuclear material, then that's when the Israelis start to cook up the idea of assassinating the supreme leader. Okay, so it may have come from Israel. It could have come from the United States too. It may well have just come from conversation between Netanyahu and Trump here. But I'm saying it may have happened in February or in January, as they're understanding this trajectory. So I'm connecting a lot of dots. I think it's a plausible explanation of what happened, how you got here. Israel's pushing the train, of course. They're the ones who say to Trump, we're launching the F-15s. We're going to kill that leader. You're either with us or not, but we're doing it. You see, so we could have shot him out of the sky. So think about, how are we going to stop Israel from killing that leader? We'd have to shoot their planes down. I don't think we're going to do that, you see. So this is the decision. So once you get to that Friday, you see what I mean? You've now been boxed in by the expectations of the smart bomb trap that I'm explaining to you. And things that didn't seem so reasonable back a year ago are suddenly more reasonable. And what was the other question?
GCC.
Oh, sure. So the wedge strategy. So I think that it's important to understand that the way this horizontal escalation strategy, their goal of fracturing the coalition, I talk about targets, mechanism, outcome, 3 steps a lot in my work. So the targets are hitting those parallel attack targets. The outcome is fracturing the coalition. What's the middle, the mechanism? They're trying, I think, to drive a wedge, not just between the United States and the GCC. They're trying to drive a wedge between the GCC leaders and their own populations. This is what's not really being discussed so much. And that's exactly what you would do, because the leaders here, again, they're authoritarian, okay? So they may have some democracy or not, but this is a very, so there's gaps already between the society and the leaders. And the societies may not like Iran. Many of them are Sunni Muslims. They're all Muslims, of course. Many of them may not like Iran, but they don't like Israel even more. So the idea that they're going to pay costs to help Israel expand its territorial control and take territory from Muslims. And then what's happened in the last week and a half? Israel is smashing Beirut, causing cleansing of Beirut. Okay, I mean, think about what's occurring. So this is not just propaganda networking here. Israel is expanding here. It wanted to cleanse Gaza. It wants to control the territory, and it wants the territory. You see what I mean? So what they're doing is they're forcing those populations to ask themselves the question, why am I paying the price? Because the leaders will keep eating high on the hog. Why am I paying the price to help Israel take Muslim territory? You see, this is going to be, now, the last time we had a really wicked version of this was Sadat in 1981. So President Sadat of Egypt in 1978 cut a deal called the Camp David Accords that was land for peace. This was about a deal with Israel. And it was very controversial at the time because it was viewed as Sadat was being too cooperative, too pro-Israel. Well, he signed it, and then 3 years later, in 1981, his own security guards at a parade he authorized, he funded, as his security guards were walking past him on the parade, they turned and shot him dead. Now, I guarantee you, he did not think he was building his own assassination that day. So this gap, and why did they do it? They published it. It's called The Neglected Duty. I studied this with my work on terrorism. So there's a whole big book by the people who did it about why they did it. It's because of that deal. Okay, it's because of that deal. So he's viewed as a traitor to the Muslim cause, so to speak. You see what I mean? But it's a very silent problem. If Sadat couldn't see his own assassination coming and essentially funded it, then this is a pretty wicked problem. You see what I mean? So people keep wanting these political violence issues to be, well, it's the FBI. If only we just get the FBI, they'll solve the problem. No, when you get politics this intense, it gets beyond the FBI. You see. And that's what you're starting to hear come out of the FBI right now, which is, just remember, folks, we're a tiny little organization. We can't, because it's the politics is up here, you see. So I hope I answered both of your questions. Yeah, this is why I'm worried about the GCC fracturing. You see, they'll get worried. If there's one attempt to assassinate one of those leaders, that may be a domino effect.
Are you amenable to a lightning round?
Yes, I'll try it.
All right. So,
all right, we'll
Veronica, can you pass that to Paulina? And we'll have Paulina and then Sarah ask your questions. And then I have one final one, if I may.
Hi, I'm Paulina. I'm an attorney for Chicago Public Schools. Previously, I worked in international criminal law at a firm doing research in war crimes and crimes against humanity. So the U.S. did not have a strategy. That's pretty obvious. When we talk about the de-escalation strategies, you point out some really difficult things that the U.S. could possibly do, like having Israel sign the proliferation agreement or Congress responding in financial against Israel bombing and stuff like that. Are there more doable things that would be
I would. So that's been my life, Paulina. I come up with the best plans. After 9/11, I did this work on suicide terrorism. I was telling the Bush administration that it was really likely they would cause the wave of terrorism. It wouldn't reduce it. And I was a liberal Republican. So for me, when I came out again, when I had this discovery from the data, I had a choice. Do I keep my mouth shut? Because I was heading to the NSC. I had friends on the NSC, and that was sort of where I was most likely going to end up a few years later. Well, I did not do that. Okay, I made a choice. I gave the stuff to Paul Wolfowitz. I gave it to them quietly here. And that's how we got IUD'd Air Base, because he came back and he said, okay, we're going to take the forces out of Saudi Arabia. We'll open another air base. So they made some adjustments, but he said, we're doing Iraq. Okay, so the problem is here that I have, and then they brought me back, and the Bush administration, who started my center, the very people I'm saying were doing everything wrong, they're the ones who gave me the first money to start the Chicago Project on suicide terrorism at the time, now security and threats. And they asked me to do this big thing for 3 hours about putting an army in Somalia, and we didn't put that army in Somalia. Okay, things like that. So I spent a lot of time, designed a transition plan to how we get our troops out. I did all this work. You see what I mean? So I am all up for spending hours and hours. I don't get to pick the president, okay, and I take that seriously, more than maybe most people do. I at one time was the advisor to both Ron Paul and Barack Obama in the primaries. Think about it. I'm probably the only person in America who's got that pedigree, okay? And that also explains why no one's going to hire me on the NSC, because you can't trust it. I'm not a card-carrying Democrat, and I'm not a card-carrying Republican. But if I could, and if I do, I will certainly bring it forth. I'm not going to hide it here. I'm not trying to help one side or another win the election. This is a wicked problem because of the reasons I'm saying. And I think the way to stimulate others to do better than I can do, to be more creative than I can be, and maybe that can happen, is to explain the problems with these so-called easy solutions. Okay, because that's the way I think you're really going to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, it just feels like it's inevitable that there are going to be boots on the ground, strong military presence at the Strait of Hormuz, or even like what Akash was saying, like maybe trying to encourage our allies who had nothing to do with this to, I don't know.
But we don't have the troops. So the problem is, we didn't have enough troops to control Iraq, and we have the same number in the military, same number. But Iran is 4 times the population of Iraq, and it's the same number. So if we couldn't control Iraq, we're not going to be able to control Iran. And so the kinds of things here that's why when Pete Hegseth said, we're not going to do Iraq 2.0, he's right, because you need conscription. That's what he did. He's not filling out the reason he's right. You see, you can't do it with 1 million people. It's not enough people, you see. You're going to need 5 million. That's the Vietnam War. That's conscription. So when he says we're not doing it, that's not on the table. He's right. He's just not giving you the real reason why that's right. Because you see, I'm giving you the actual reason behind it.
All right. Well, thank you, Professor. I'm going to bring it back to Chicago here. So my name is Sarah Boyle. I work at the Chicago Police Department and our superintendents.
Have we met before?
We potentially have. I did go to Harris for my master's, but prior to that, I actually went to St. Andrews and studied terrorism and political violence.
Maybe, yes.
Yeah.
Nice
so
to see you again.
nice to see you. And so kind of seeing that, I do see international play out on the local level. It's not something we necessarily, we do talk about and we do get briefings, as you can imagine, but I think, having been here in the city in the past couple of years, do you have any recommendations to local leaders, both to, local leadership as well as law enforcement, of how these things will impact as we go into this sort of wicked scenario, which for me is a reality, and I think for everybody who lives here. But, what are things that you see of the strategies you've seen play out on the international level? Are there things that we should be thinking about strategies here on the local? Yeah,
so former Secretary of Defense of DHS, Jay Johnson's on my board at CPOST, and he did a nice job on MSNBC, I think it was yesterday, explaining, the tactical issues, which is there may well be sleeper cells. And here's Jay Johnson used those words. That's pretty, you got to take that seriously. And we don't have enough FBI agents, as I've already said. I want to add a layer beyond that. Okay. The layer beyond that is to understand how terrorism, the problem, grows. So what he's doing is giving you a snapshot of where it may be now, and that's already pretty worrisome. What I'm really worried about is what happened when we went into Iraq, where we didn't just have the same number of terrorists trying to kill us. We actually grew the terrorists. You see, we actually produced more terrorists than we killed. Rumsfeld eventually said that. I was arguing that one of the reasons you shouldn't do Iraq, but he eventually said that. And so the problem here is not just the threat we have now today. The problem is it may well grow over a period of months. So in Iraq, we invade Iraq, and that was in March. It wasn't until August, 5 months later, that we had the undeniable terrorist campaign I was talking about. So this is not like a light switch. It takes some time. But what's occurring in this period of time, or what's the issue here? Why did that one grow? It's because you may have religious reasons, political reasons to be a terrorist here, but the reason terrorism typically grows is when the people become terrorists. They're not already terrorists. They become terrorists when the outside military power tries to control their politics. It's not about how many boots exactly are on the ground. It's, does America want to control the government? Afghanistan. So we didn't just topple the Taliban, we took over and we enforced change of women and the society. Now, I'm very pro those issues. I'm not, but in terms of doing that, that was always going to generate a fantastic amount of new terrorists, because although we think that's a good idea, that society does not already there. They're not there, you see. So when you go in and you're controlling a government and then you change the society and so forth, that's effectively what's happening with Donald Trump. So whether he does the regime change and fully happen or not, it's now clear he's wanting to redo the society. You see what I mean? Put in the pro-democracy, you see. This is exactly made to order, not on a day, but over months, to mobilize more people. What is Israel doing? Israel's on another front in Lebanon doing a similar thing in southern Lebanon. It's not about just bombing buildings. It's about reshaping the politics. And what you're seeing is in the last week, it actually starts on February 28. I've kind of lost count, the number. It's about 7. I think we're up to about 7 Islamic plots here. And what you are seeing is already the beginnings of this. This is just way the beginnings. Now, that's why I worry about this problem by June. Now, there's another layer of this, okay, which is with ISIS. We've had some ISIS stuff so far. ISIS was a non-state actor. It was not a state. Iran's a state. Now, what's the difference between a state and a non-state actor? Things like drones, things like shoulder-fired missiles, bazookas, okay? There are thousands of those. ISIS didn't have that, okay? Now, maybe they got a couple, all right? But Iran, got to remember, 92 million, 1 million in arms. They got a lot of weapons. They've been giving those weapons to Hezbollah, giving them maybe even as far as Hamas. Think about secreting them all the way into Hamas, what you got to do to make that happen, okay? The Houthis, right? So what you're talking about is not just even the problem we faced and when we took Saddam down, where we had, that was that level where it went like that with the non-state actors. So you have a country now we've gone up against that's the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in history, okay? So that is just a fact. And I don't say that to be anti-Iran or anything. It's just a fact, okay? But it's not just sponsoring terrorism, it's the equipment. And the money, but it's the equipment, you see? Because what a terrorist organization does is they produce the lethal equipment. That's what a terrorist they do 2 things. They recruit and they produce the IEDs. Now, we had somebody throw one at Gracie Mansion, an IED. It didn't go. It wasn't a very good one. So you take an amateur, you or I go, and we say, okay, we're really mad. We're going to go make an IED. First of all, we're more likely to kill ourselves than anybody else just by putting it together. And second, even if we somehow magically manage to put it together without killing ourselves, the idea is going to hurt anybody else. So these are these amateur-style IEDs. Well, that's when you get the terrorist groups, because the terrorist groups come in and they say, we've been doing this for months. We're really experts at this, you see. So this is where Iran is way beyond that, you see. So if we understand that you have your amateur hour, then you have your terrorist group here. Now you have a state. They got a lot of capability. That's why I worry about the taking some of their uranium and putting it into bombs. And you have radiological weapons, which, good luck when the political leader says, that went off at the Willis Tower. But, don't worry, it'll be okay. No, you're going to have a hard time getting people to go back for a long time here. So you don't need this to kill lots of people. The point is to have the effect, you see. And so I think there could be some really, so this is why this whole idea that we're going down this road, I realize you want to hear a happy story. Okay, not you, but I'm just telling you keep asking because you want to prepare. But this is why this thing should not have happened in June. You see, and it's not about the politics of Israel. Maybe it is for most people, but this is about the security of the country that's at issue.
So now that we're all well and fully nauseated, I'm really going to challenge you, though. You have, and we're a little over time, so thank you for humoring us. I would love for you to take just 2 minutes for me to,
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
So because I've been so busy, we haven't had date night in weeks at my house.
Yeah.
So my wife right now, I can tell you
She's
where.
looking at her watch.
No. She's waiting for me at a restaurant.
Oh.
So we took it. No, it's okay. She knows. She knows. No,
she knows.
No,
so let's make it really worth.
No, she looked at the other way around. I'm just telling you, she looked at it the other way around, which was this is the opportunity for date night.
Well, you're very welcome.
Yes, I'm going to tell Carol that.
So you have some of the cities. I mean, they're already leaders of the city, as you could hear.
Yeah.
But I really want to nudge on Sarah's important question because that was actually my final question. And I don't think we got a great answer to it, in part because everything is sounding quite dire, but we can't go back to last June. So the only way forward is forward. What can the people around this table, what can we all be doing in Chicago?
Well, there is one policy
that
I would push. It'll be hard because it's not going to be connected to Iran. But which is, I think we need a 3-month moratorium on federal militarized agents in the city of Chicago and liberal cities. So you're talking about Brandon Johnson or Governor Pritzker. Now, I have given testimony to the Illinois Accountability Commission. And I've talked to them about this. I'm not sure that they're going to bite on this. I'm not sure the Democrats are going to bite on this because the big pushback, I think, is, well, you only want to have a moratorium of the federal militarized agents for 3 months. It's a much bigger problem than that. And what about the rest of the year? My point is, we don't even have a moratorium for 3 months, and you're worried about it. Let's at least start with 3 months. And if you can expand beyond that, all well and good, but you got to start somewhere. And why would you pick the moratorium? And you know what I mean by the moratorium? The Black Hawk helicopters, the masked agents, the CBP going into surprise raids in the neighborhoods and so forth. It's because you do it in the fall to protect the elections. Now, you might again say, but we want to do more than that. But this is the opportunity to at least get this thing started, you see. And it's because our elections are our precious asset, our precious jewel in our crown. And you already have the experience of Midway Blitz, Metro Blitz, President Trump afterwards saying what he's planning on doing. Now his political fortunes may be not getting better, it may be even worse. We don't really know, of course. But I would start now with a moratorium and this would be public. And what I would say is, if the governor and Mayor Johnson wanted to do a big event at the University of Chicago, where we also brought the governor of Utah, I'd be all down for trying to support that. Because I think that this would be, right now, people are looking for what can they do? Well, when inflation is going to take off from this, it's like COVID. You can worry every day and watch the inflation go up. Here, there is something to do, which is to be proactive about the bigger consequences, which could be, is there some way this could actually hurt our democracy? And I can't tell you for sure Trump will do anything, but notice that people keep waiting to react. And then, we got the courts. Well, okay, this is what I'm saying. The Illinois Accountability Commission, I'm glad they're pursuing the legal options. But we're now in March? And look at so the damage is done. Martinez, who was shot 5 times, had the federal prosecutors, after they tried the court case, there's no there, so they gave up. She was still shot 5 times. You see, I'm talking about proactive. So when you say, Ariel, what could be done? I give advice about what to do proactively. And most of the time, the leaders don't do it. They just don't want to do it, right? Because they got other things to worry about. You know, we got my Iran problem. I'm meeting on the presses of this and that. And so now a few times, and I don't want to get into that because then but there have been a few times when things have been proactive and I think that's good. So I have enough confidence that maybe it could help, but it is much harder to prevent. Prevention is the hardest thing I've seen. People keep saying, tell me what to do to prevent. But then when you get into the actual behind the scenes rooms, you hear all the reasons why you can't get in the room because there's 15 items on the agenda before you. And then you get in and then you find there's even more agenda items, you see, but I think that would be the number one thing. A moratorium on federal militarized agents for any purpose unless the governor and the mayor agree. And that could be any city in America. I think you might get Republicans behind that because if there is a Democratic president down the road, why aren't they going to come up with excuses here to decide that they're going to do things around churches or something like that? Who knows what's going to come. But I think this would be something that would actually be a tangible thing. You've got a few months now to get this moving. But if you wait until, whatever it is, October 15th, and the very first agents start to come in and they start to surveil the polling in the precincts, you don't have time. You're way late to the game.
Well, and that is a very important message as we look ahead to our primaries on Tuesday. So, Bob, thank you so much for a really compelling conversation and for letting us either entice you to go out on a date with Carol or keeping you from that date.
This is a pleasure.
So thank you for joining us.
So thank you very much, Ariel. Thank you so much. And thank you for all this great questions here. And I really wish you all the best. And this gives me great confidence in our future leaders. I'm looking forward to seeing you rise.
All right, guys, we're going to take 15.